today's video is going to be about how I went to therapy for the first time. Now, I think therapy is a very good thing, don't get me wrong. I've been wanting to go for a while just because when I was in college, I minored in psychology. I don't know if that really means anything, but I minored in psychology and majored in communication, and a lot of times in my classes, my professors recommended us to try therapy at least once. I was always interested in going because I do believe that therapy in general is just a great way for us to learn more about ourselves and just learning how to be a better person. So I've always wanted to go, but for me, the really big thing was always money because it seemed very expensive, and I was a broke college student at the time. And even now, I'm not a college student, but I mean, I have enough, but I'm definitely not balling or anything like that. And also, I think it was just really hard because I'm Filipino. I think in a lot of Asian cultures in general, therapy is very stigmatized, and people, they don't really like to address that someone has a mental health problem there. And even if it's so obvious that someone is not okay, they'll do anything to avoid the fact that it's an actual problem. So that's kind of how therapy is seen in my family and in my culture. I feel very fortunate to have learned growing up that that's really not the case. So I've always wanted to go and try it out, and here we are. Spilled my soup because I'm a hot mess and don't know what to do with myself. By the way, in case you guys are wondering what I'm eating, yesterday I made salt and pepper fish, which is like crumbled up because I fucked up cooking it, but it tastes okay. And then I have my egg drop soup that I spilled and some spinach and rice. And I just made some General Tso's sauce for my salt and pepper fish. So yes, that is what we are eating today. Mainly leftovers, but leftovers can still be good. So I have been holding off on this video for the past 24 hours. No, I just can't anymore. We have to do it, guys. We have to do it. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I started therapy recently, and the reason why I finally decided to go, despite money still being a challenge for me, is because recently in my life, I've just had a lot of really big identity shifts with who I am as a person, and that has kind of affected my life in some ways. And some of my friends who do go to therapy recommended finally trying it out. So shout out to my friend Isabel, who I believe I mentioned in some of my other videos before, but she recommended some therapists for me. So I did some consultations with like 5 different therapists, and I was able to find one that I felt like I really clicked with. I'll call her M. But yes, I really like my therapist so far. I had my first session with her last week, and it was a little awkward because I have never done therapy before, but I think that my therapist just made it really easy for me to open up to her. Even when I did feel a little awkward, she made me feel comfortable, probably because it was like our first time. I think that's completely normal, and one of my friends who's studying to be a therapist told me that it is normal for the first session to be a little awkward. So yeah, props to Isabel for helping me get started because I really had no idea where to start at first. So in my first session, my therapist told me that in the first few sessions we're just going to be about really trying to get to know who I am as a person. And I realized, despite me having this YouTube channel, unless you're literally like one of my best friends, I feel very uncomfortable talking about myself for long periods of time because it makes me kind of get into my head a little bit, and I start to think, oh, am I talking too much? Does this person think I'm being conceited because I'm talking so much? Like, I should probably shift it to someone else. It's weird because yes, I'm gonna admit it, I'm basic as everyone else, and I wanna be famous. On YouTube and in general, and despite wanting positive attention, when I receive it, it's really hard for me sometimes to accept it because it makes me feel like I'm being conceited. Is that weird? Probably it is. It probably is weird, But yeah, I didn't tell my therapist that, but I kind of realized it after our session. But you know, once again, my therapist made it really easy for me to talk to her. And when she asked me the dreaded question, like, so tell me about yourself. We all get in like job interviews and whatnot when you first get to meet someone, or even on dates. That's such an awful question to ask on dates. Yeah, when she asked me that, I literally told her, I don't know what to say. Where do I start? You know, there's so many layers and things to a person. Like, I don't know where to start with this question ever when people ask me about that. And she was really nice about it and just ended up asking me a bit more specific questions to help me get started. Like, what do you like to do? Like, what are some of your hobbies? Things like that. And I think that made it a lot easier for me to open up. And she was a very good listener, super empathetic. And I could definitely tell that when I was describing certain situations to her, she was putting herself in my place, and I felt like she really heard me and understood where I was coming from. And I appreciated that so much, because that is something I didn't realize till after the session that I was really struggling with. Okay, I'm gonna shift positions. I feel like this is gonna be a kind of, how do I say this, a touchy subject to touch upon. But living in Texas, I feel like you really get to see the big polarization, the two sides of the spectrum of the types of people that are here in the US and just how polarized they are. And I feel like it has been a real struggle for me sometimes to find people who care about the same things that I care about. My channel, once again, like a really big emphasis on it is slow fashion and sustainability. And I realized in the past few months that some of the things that people care about tend to be clustered together. And a good light example of this might be like, oh, if you like dancing, you probably like music, and maybe you're even more prone to play an instrument, or vice versa. You know what I mean? Something like that. I don't know if I'm necessarily like wording this correctly right now, but yes, it's really been hard for me to find people who think and value the same things that I do sometimes being here. And that I wasn't being heard, and I didn't really realize that until this therapy session. So there you go, it's already been helping from the start. But yes, I will say therapy has definitely gotten me into thinking a lot more about why I feel the way that I do. And one of the very first lessons that I learned in this first therapy session is that it is okay to care about what other people think about you. That's what I learned. And I know this might sound very contradictory, because we always hear across social media and maybe from your friends or your family, like, oh, you shouldn't care about what other people think about you. But my therapist said that the word shouldn't is a very hard word to use on ourselves, because at the end of the day, we as humans are ingrained to want to be liked and to feel a sense of belonging with people. We feel this innate desire to be accepted, and that is totally okay and in our biology. So saying that you shouldn't care about what other people think is placing a really harsh expectation on ourselves as people. So that was the first lesson that I learned in therapy. And of course, that's not to say that other people's opinions should completely dictate our actions and what we think about ourselves, but there is a fine line of caring too much and caring too little, and we kind of need to know where to draw that line and not to be too hard on ourselves in general, because at the end of the day, we're people and we should learn to love ourselves. Now, the second thing that I learned in therapy, it's not necessarily because I wasn't doing it, but it's because it's something good that I, or rather we, it's a me and Vlad thing we're doing, is that laughter is a good conflict de-escalator. So my therapist, she is getting her PhD in marriage and family therapy, and when she was asking during our session about how my relationship is with Vlad, my husband, and I was describing it to her, long story short, we're happy. Basically, I was telling her how Vlad and I handle conflict in our relationship, which I feel like we handle it very well, because we're really good at being able to communicate and convey how we feel without really saying hurtful things to the other person. I mean, Okay, granted, I like to stir the pot a little bit, guys, okay? I'm a Gemini, you gotta stir the pot a little bit sometimes. But anyways, I was telling her that Vlad and I never really like to go to sleep angry at each other, and usually when we do have arguments, it's literally like 10 minutes long, and then one of us makes the other person laugh. And she told me that laughter is a really good way to de-escalate conflict because it kind of helps ease the tension in the situation a little bit, and also promotes empathy, which is actually taught in marriage and family therapy, which I told Vlad about this, and we were like, yeah, we're doing something right, and we didn't even have to learn it really, just do it. So very proud of ourselves. And yeah, that's the second thing that I learned in my first therapy session. And the last thing that I learned in therapy: work is not you. I'm gonna say that again. Work is not you. There's a lot that goes into this topic. I think that a lot of Americans can probably identify with this issue because in America, I feel like people value you as a person sometimes based on how much you work.
And then just work like hell. I mean, you just have to put in, 80 to 100 hour weeks every week. And then,
a lot of work.
And if you're not being productive, then you are valued less as a person or are considered lazy.
I have the best advice for women in business. Get your fucking ass up and work. It seems like nobody wants to work these days.
And I don't necessarily think that's true, or at least I'm telling myself I should not think that, because there should be times where you set aside time for yourself. I just noticed that recently, because I am, lacking a little bit in the finance department, I have been working really hard to try to be more consistent with the content that I put on YouTube, as well as trying to find ways to get more business coming into our photography studio and my styling business. I just noticed that there are times when I, and sometimes Vlad, where we just don't know when to stop working. So I'll work until like 9 or 10:30 at night. And I know maybe this doesn't sound that late for those people who stay up until like 2 or 5 in the morning, because I know I used to be like that, but typically Vlad and I really try to go to bed around like 10:30 to at latest like 11:30. Sometimes we work until it's time to go to bed, and I noticed that that has affected my sleep a little bit, and sometimes it's hard for me to find time for myself. So I told my therapist about this, and she noticed that I just do a lot of things. Like, I have a lot of interests and a lot of projects and things that I'm working on. And so she asked me for my homework, what is one thing that you can do for yourself this week? And my homework assignment that I gave myself is to stop working at 7 p.m. But I also realized that it's not just me who does this. Like, once again, this is kind of a message that is really placed on our society in America, is that you are what you do for work. And when you go to networking events, or even in general, like whether you're on a date or just meeting someone new, most of the time, the first question that people ask you is, oh, what do you do? A person can do so many things. They're not just their work. Maybe some people don't even work in a field that they like. So why is that your first question to identify who or what someone is? And to be honest, the first day, even though I ended a little like 15 minutes later than I was supposed to, it was really nice to just have time for myself and not think about work, not think about, oh, I have to get this done, and just do something I like. But I also noticed that a lot of my friends are kind of the same way. Like, they work a lot, and I just remember whenever I ask them, or they ask me, what are you doing later, or tonight, or tomorrow, and everyone's just like, oh, just busy, just working, or it's either, the answer is either I'm just busy or I'm just working. And yes, I get it, like, everyone's busy, but once again, here in America, there's such a big flex on being busy. It's really annoying. I mean, I really hope I'm not that bad at this, but I try so hard not to sound pretentious when I say I'm busy. It's like a whole comparison game. Who's busier than who? Who's working more than who? Who's making more than who? I'm not trying to think of these things, but I feel like those conversations revolve around that type of thinking, and it's ingrained in our culture as Americans, and it's not a really healthy way to think about ourselves and our identity and who we are. And when you associate yourself too strongly with your work and what you do, it can just really negatively affect your mental health. And if you do receive maybe negative feedback on your work, it can really lead to strong feelings of anxiety and depression, and can feel like an attack on your identity when, once again, in reality, that's not who you are as a person. Which is why it's so important to have boundaries when you're trying to balance your work and other aspects of your life. So that is how my first therapy session went. I have already learned quite a bit and have been very retrospective after all of what we unpacked in just our first session. I know it's gonna be a lot of work, but I am excited to continue on this therapy journey and really dive into how I can just help myself cope better and be a better person and whatnot. And yeah, I hope that you also maybe learned something from this video. I hope it was relatable in some way. Just know that it's gonna be okay.
That would really be sweet.